So we now have robotics, generative AI involved in what could be a very private process, very regulated process. We got HIPAA and other rules and regulations. What do you need to factor into while working with GenAI from a regulatory perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting way to pitch it because the regulators are catching up, and we see regulations coming out, either binding or non-binding, from the major entities, the EU, the US, the Australian, the Canadian governments, the New Zealand government, processing guidelines. I reviewed the EU AI Act 2 years ago when it was in draft mode, and it had no mention of Gen AI. All of a sudden, November comes along, November 22, we get ChatGPT comes in, it pops into everyone's homes, phones, and everything, and the EU AI Act has completely missed it because it wasn't real. So they've got an addendum put in. By the time the draft moves to the next part of the process, it's got a section on Gen AI, specifically because it's a different nature of a thing. But the regulators across the world are going to do their best to keep up, but they are going to be a step behind. And what we have to do as a community, as people who take care of people, particularly, life, accident, and health, we're looking after people in situations where they need to be looked after correctly and right. And we can't undersell people insurance, or we can't not cover people when they need to pull down on that promise. That we've got to do gut checks all the time. This came from one of the claims leaders at one of our customer events. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it. Don't look to, well, is there any regulatory issue with not doing this? Because the regulator can't catch up. They will. And they'll come around and say, you shouldn't have done that. But from the lead off, you have to do it internally yourself. You have to be very conscious and focused on, is this the right thing to do for the people who have access to our products? And if that doesn't feel right, take a big step back and figure out, is there a different way of achieving the same outcome? When it comes to, are we using the right tools? It's the same answer as with any change in process, any change in technology. Did we do rigorous validation? We got to go absolutely heavy on, is this thing going to do what we need it to do? It is non-deterministic. Any AI you're using is going to have a non-deterministic outcome. So you cannot possibly test a majority of the paths in a way you could if you're doing payment calculations, or if you're doing moving paper, or doing process engineering, or how many calls are we going to be answering, and doing staff up or staff down. You can work those things out with mathematical models to a certain level of confidence. You can do payment calculations and have a certain confidence of a certain level of coverage. With generative AI and with AI in general, you have to have non-deterministic mechanisms of testing edge cases, of testing various a breadth of situations, and then you have to leap and go, this is good enough, but never leap the full way. You've got to ensure that you do not hand over risk management to AI. AI will never own the risk. It is not going to own your liability. It's not going to own your decisions. As a carrier or as an employer implementing a system, you've got to make sure you've got the keys at all times. You can dial it up, you can dial it down, you can switch it off. You can switch it off for specific employers, something we're working on recently, where some employers won't allow you to use AI because they're worried about it. So if you're a carrier selling to employers, you've got to be able to switch off the AI and constantly revalidate it, constantly retest it, constantly revisit it, and make sure you're never out of control. So even in an automation path, it's you that sets the automation path. You set the parameters first, and you test those parameters all the way through.